it's Sarah and today's Booklist Thursday. This is a video series I do with my friend Lindsay over at Lindsay's Little Library. And every Thursday we bring you some sort of video that involves a list of books for whatever topic we feel like talking about or discussion that we feel like talking about. And today we are going to give you some recommendations for books that are good if you're just starting out in a specific genre. So something that kind of can be a good introduction to that genre. So I have a few different genres I'm going to talk about. These are some of my favorites, and we're going to start with middle grade. Middle grade is something that I think is becoming a lot more popular on BookTube. A lot more people are starting to read more middle grade. Obviously, the biggest, most popular middle grade series is Harry Potter, and a lot of people don't remember that these were, Harry Potter was written for fourth graders. That was kind of the target audience when Harry Potter came out, but everybody read them, and everyone still reads them. Even adults today are reading Harry Potter for the first time. So that's probably the most popular one. So I would definitely say if you haven't read Harry Potter, read Harry Potter. But I'm going to go with something else today. And another good introduction to middle grade, I think, would be The Land of Stories, and that is by Chris Colfer. This is the first book in the Land of Stories series. It is a completed series. There's 6 books total. This is the first one, called The Wishing Spell. And the reason this would be a really good introduction to middle grade, especially for adults, is because this is written by Chris Colfer, who starred in the show Glee. He played Kurt, and he came up with these different spins on fairy tales. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of characters in these books that are fairy tale. There's princesses, there's Cinderella, there's Rapunzel, there's fairy tale characters like Red Riding Hood and Jack the Beanstalk, and just a Mother Goose, like all types of characters that we are already familiar with because we knew about them growing up, and he takes a different spin on it. So this follows a set of twins, and they have this book called The Land of Stories, and it's something that's always been in their family, and they accidentally find out that they can actually travel into this book. They can fall into the book, into the stories, into the land, and that is where all these characters live. It's a whole world. It's nothing like you think it is. It's nothing like the fairy tales that we hear today. They have very different lives with the same characters, but they have different things happening that you don't think about. There's a lot of danger in here. The whole land is not completely safe. There's definitely a big villain who's, kind of trying to take over things, and it can get pretty scary at points. Another fun thing about these is that, this is written by an adult, so he puts in some adult humor that maybe some kids wouldn't pick up on necessarily, but I did, and I loved it. And I was giggling at a couple parts where Kaylin was like, "What?" It's like, "Nothing, just keep going." So that's kind of fun. It keeps the adults entertained as well. So I think if you're thinking about starting to maybe want to get into middle grade, this would be a great series to start off with. And again, it's a completed series. There's 6 books. My daughter has read all of them. I've read the first 2. I have number 3 sitting next to my bed to hopefully get to soon. But she completely flew through it, and she just absolutely loves these books. She said these are some of her favorite books of all time. So definitely a good introduction to middle grade. Let's talk about my favorite genre, which is thrillers. And I'm going to go psychological because I definitely, psychological thrillers are some of my favorite books. They're the ones that keep you on the edge of your seat. You don't really know what's going on. You don't really know how you're feeling. You're feeling things you probably shouldn't be feeling. And that's definitely present with this one. And that is You by Caroline Kepnes. Ooh, this book is top 5 for me. This is a top 5 favorite books of all time. It made me feel things that I knew I should not be feeling, but I felt them anyway. And I was okay with it, but I shouldn't have been okay with it. This follows Joe. He works in a bookstore, and he meets a girl named Beck when she comes in, and she is looking for a book. He helps her out. He checks her out, all this stuff. They're having conversations. The second she leaves the store, he starts stalking her because Joe is a stalker. And the cool thing about this is that this is told from Joe's perspective. You are inside Joe's head the entire time through the book. So you are really seeing him stalk her, and you're rationalizing everything he's doing because he's rationalizing it to you. So it makes sense to you. Like, you better go follow her because where is she going? This person is not good for them. You need to get this person out of the way. You're justifying everything he's doing, but everything he's doing is wrong. and then you find yourself rooting for Joe, but you're not supposed to because he's a psycho stalker. So if you want a good psychological thriller that's going to mess with your head, this one. And then go watch the show, which is on Netflix. So good. All right, so my next one is going to be contemporary, and I'm going to talk about an adult contemporary book. It's not crazy adult, like, you know, there's not a lot of adult scenes, I guess you could say, in this book, but it is adult as in, you know, the characters are adults and, you know, all that. So I'm going to talk about Christina Lauren. This one is Love in Other Words. This is the first book that I read from them, and I have read more since, and I want to read all of them now. I have to read all of their books. This is a writing duo. They're best friends who write a ton of books together. And this one is particularly really, really good because I fell in love with these characters so quickly, and I fell in love with their story and how everything went. It made me feel a lot of feelings. I felt happy, I felt sad, I felt angry, I felt dread, I felt happy again, and I loved following their story. So basically, this follows a couple named Ethan and Macy, and you start out the book as adults, and they haven't spoken in 11 years. No contact, haven't spoken, nothing. They end up running into each other in a coffee shop. And then all of a sudden, it's just like magnetic pull. They're back in each other's lives again. And then you go back into the past. So this is a dual timeline. And you see them, you know, meet for the first time, and you see their relationship start, and then you see their friendship grow, and then it grows into something more, and then it's completely shattered. And you find out why. And it takes a while to get there. But you go through this whole thing, and it goes back and forth between adults, they're back in each other's lives. How are they going to handle this, to when they're meeting and as their friendship is progressing and everything. And this is a book where when I finished it, I was angry that it was done. I wanted more. I wanted it to keep going. I wanted another 200 pages with these characters. You know, it's an ending that is satisfying. It's a satisfying ending, like the book ended, but I was like, but I don't want to not be with these people anymore. I wanted to be with them more. I wanted to close it and then turn it over and open it up and just start from the beginning again. That was the feeling that this book gave me, and I don't know that I've ever had that before with any book. And I loved them. Ethan is such a great Ethan. Elliot. Did I say Ethan before? I said Ethan before. Okay. Ethan is in a different book of theirs. This one is Elliot, so I apologize. You're probably screaming at me. His name is Elliot. I know. His name is Elliot, and I think I said Ethan when I first started. Anyway, Elliot is a fantastic character. He's one of my favorite characters. He is perfectly imperfect, and just loved him so, so much. And yeah, so if you're looking to maybe pick up an adult romance, this isn't heavy on, like I said, like steamy scenes or anything. There's nothing really steamy in this one. There's, you know, a tiny bit, but it's nothing over the top, nothing that would make you blush. And it definitely will hit you in all the feels for sure. So if that's something that you're thinking about maybe starting to get into, this would be a great one to pick up first. All right, the next genre I want to talk about is historical fiction, which is another genre that has quickly become one of my favorites. And this one I read long time ago. I mean, I think I read it before Kaylin was born, and Kaylin is 11 now. So I read it a very, very long time ago for a book club and absolutely fell in love with it. I was not expecting to love a book that was set in the 1930s that follows a circus. That wasn't something I ever thought I would pick up on my own, but we picked it, and so that happened, and I fell in love with it. And it's one of my top 10 favorite books of all time. And that's Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. And this is a book that I've actually read twice. I read it again a while later, like 3 or 4 years later, I think, and it held up. I loved it just as much as when I read it the first time. So this follows a young boy who decides to join the circus. He's not really living a great life, and he wants to get away. So he joins the circus and ends up working with elephants. And he falls in love with one of the girls that performs on the elephants. She's a performer. She's also married to the elephant trainer, who is awful. Really, really bad. So he spends his time trying to save her and trying to save the elephants from this evil person. And it is so fantastic. It's such a great book. I loved the beginning and then how it tied into everything. It was brilliant, and I absolutely loved it. I remember it was one book that really made me go, oh my gosh. Like, I physically gasped when I was reading this book. And I thought it was fantastic. The movie adaptation with Reese Witherspoon and Robert Pattinson is also fantastic. It's a really, really good adaptation of this book. So if you haven't read this, I definitely recommend it. And it opened my eyes to not only historical fiction, but to circus settings, which is now one of my things that I gravitate towards. Okay, and the last genre I want to talk about is fantasy. And I'm going to give you two different recommendations. I'm going to talk about young adult and adult, because there are definitely distinct differences between young adult fantasy and adult fantasy. So for the young adult fantasy is probably, if you want to get into fantasy in general, would be a really good place to start, just because it's going to be a little bit more simple. It's not going to be completely complicated. It's not going to be something you have to just like wrap your mind around and try to digest so much information. It's not going to be super complicated. It's going to be a different world, a completely made up world, but it's going to be easy to follow. And I think a really good introduction for that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. And this is a series I'm currently rereading, and I'm really enjoying my reread of them. And so this follows a young girl named Selena. She is an assassin, and in the beginning of the very first book, she is in a slave camp because she has been captured, and she ends up getting taken out by the prince and becomes his appointed one, I guess you could say, to take a part of this trial to become the king's assassin. And if she wins, then she gets her freedom. She has to serve a term being the king's assassin, where she will go out and she will kill people on the king's command. And she does that for a few years, and then she gets her freedom. After that, she doesn't have to go back to the slave camp where she could pretty much die. And it's fantastic, you guys. It's really, really good. It's not overcomplicated. It's easy to follow. It's a completely made up world, but it's very easy to understand, and it's easy to follow along with what's going on. Selena's a great character. She is definitely a badass female, and you see her, deal with everyday emotions that she's not really used to, like falling in love, and what's right and what's wrong, because she's an assassin. She kills people, but you see her struggle with that. And yeah. So really, really good. I think if you're just kind of getting into fantasy and maybe want to start a little bit lighter, this is a good one to start with. Now, if you want to start with adult fantasy, or you've read some young adult fantasy and you want to get into adult fantasy, Brandon Sanderson is the way to go. This is the first book in his Mistborn series. And okay, so I was terrified of this when I went into it, because I was still kind of starting to read fantasy. I was reading mostly young adult just to kind of get the feel for it, and things that are kind of common, and being able to just get lost in a completely made up world. And then I ended up picking up this one, and I was terrified because this is an adult epic high fantasy. It is a very complicated world. It has a complicated magic system. There's politics. There's a whole history. It's a whole thing. You have to wrap your mind around a lot of things. So I was scared going in, because I was like, am I going to understand this? Is it going to go over my head? I don't know. But everybody loves it. But everyone who had read it and loved it are people who normally read fantasy on a regular basis. And I wasn't that type of reader at that point. I'm getting there. But I picked this up, and oh my gosh. Okay. So yes, it is a complicated world. There's politics. There's a whole magic system that you have to understand. But the way that he writes it, I understood everything. I was not once confused about anything. And the way that he writes, he will put in the littlest little details that are just, oh, and it makes it click. Just a little teeny tiny detail, like, oh, okay, that makes so much sense. And if that detail hadn't been put in, maybe with some other authors that write in the same genre, it could have been more confusing for me. So I think he is a brilliant, brilliant writer. So this follows a young girl who they live in a world where the villain has won. There's already been a battle. The villain has won. He's in power. He's obviously very, very corrupt. The people under him are suffering. He doesn't care. And follow this girl who is trying to survive in this environment. She ends up joining a group of, I guess you could call them like maybe missionaries or vigilantes who are trying to take him down. And there's a magic system that is so brilliant where, you know, the type of metal that you ingest, and I mean, you have to ingest it into your body and into your system, and it gives you powers. And certain people can use certain metals. And then there's also the Mistborn who can use all the metals. And it's brilliant. I loved it. I want to read it again. Like, now I'm sitting here talking about it. Now I want to reread this. It is a trilogy. I've only read the first book. I do have the other 2 books that I haven't read yet, but at some point I would actually like to reread this first one and then read the trilogy and just kind of binge the whole thing. That's something that I think I'm going to do at some point, hopefully soon. So I don't know. I'm going to have to like contemplate on that and when I want to do it, but I definitely want to. Like, I loved this so much that I would reread it in a heartbeat. And I remember I flew through it, and this is not a short book. It's a long book, and it's a whole thing. So, but for even kind of a fantasy newbie like me, it was so easy to understand, and just the writing was fantastic. Okay, guys, that is it for me. Those are some of the books that I think would be really good introductions into genres. If there's a genre that you're thinking about maybe starting out with or want to give a try, I think this would be good places to get started. And make sure you go check out Lindsay's channel today. I'll have her link down below, and see what genres and books she picks. I'm really excited to see what she's going to pick as well. And if you guys have any recommendations for these genres, put them down below and let myself know and let other people know too. So if anyone's looking for other recommendations, they can see your comments down below for books that you think would be really good introductions to a certain genre. And we will talk to you guys again soon. Hope you have a great day.